My own mother tried to ruin me in court by describing me as a failure incapable of holding down a job, but when the presiding judge revealed in front of everyone that I had been a magistrate for 6 years, the color drained from her face and silence fell over the courtroom. My name is Amélie DuPont, I am 30 years old, and I never would have imagined that the woman who gave me life would try to destroy me in court. She, Claire Moreau, my mother, took the stand to testify against me. She described me as an unstable mother, incapable of holding down a job. What she didn't know was that I had been serving as a family court judge for 6 years. When Margot Birajian, the presiding judge, stood up and spoke, my mother's expression turned as white as a sheet. The silence that filled the courtroom was absolute. I grew up in Lexington, a small town outside of Boston. From the outside, our 2-story house looked like the picture of the perfect family, just as my mother wanted everything to look. However, within those walls, the reality was very different. She embodied the most severe perfectionism. One was never enough, there had to be one and everything. Winning second place in a competition only served to make her point at the girl who had come in first. My father, Jan, was my only defender. I remember how he would wink at me across the table every time my mother launched into her merciless criticism. Later, when we were alone, he would say, "Your mother only wants what's best for you," though his eyes always held silent apologies. He saw the damage her words caused me, but he loved her too much to confront her. When I was 12, my father died of a heart attack while driving home. I lost my ally, the only one who made me feel good enough. From then on, my mother became even harsher. She intensified her demands and became obsessed with what the neighbors might think, with maintaining the illusion of a perfect family, even though we were broken inside. She would tell me, "We have to be strong, Amélie. No one respects weakness." What I really wanted was for him not to show my pain in public. My tears were relegated to my pillow at night. School became my escape. I threw myself into my studies with a dedication that even surprised my teachers. If I couldn't win my mother's approval, at least I could win everyone else's. Perfect grades and awards were my shield against her criticism. But they rarely worked. There were always comparisons. "Sophie Lambert's daughter just got into Harvard and she plays 3 instruments," she'd say, ignoring my report card full of straight A's lying on the table. I didn't play any instruments, and to her that made me ordinary. In the midst of those painful years, I discovered something: I had a passion for justice. First in the debate club, where my voice found strength in defending ethical and legal ideas. Then, in a youth court program, I felt that for the first time I was exactly where I was meant to be. When I confessed to my mother my dream of becoming a lawyer and, perhaps, a judge someday, she laughed. It wasn't a kind laugh, but the kind of contemptuous laugh that makes your stomach churn. "Be realistic, Amélie. Those positions are for people with connections and pedigree. Aim for something achievable," she said. That day, in our kitchen, something changed in me. Her words, instead of crushing me, became fuel. I would be a judge, not in spite of what she thought of me, but precisely to prove her wrong. College applications were my silent rebellion. I sent 17 without telling my mother about most of them. When the acceptance letters arrived, including one from Boston University with a partial scholarship, I felt a power I'd never had before. For the first time, I had options that weren't dictated by her expectations. "Boston is too expensive, community college is good enough," she said dismissively. I ignored her. I got into Boston University. I made up for what the scholarship didn't cover by working 3 jobs, mornings at a coffee shop near campus, afternoons at the university library, and weekends as a research assistant for a professor. I barely slept. She called it stubbornness, I called it independence. Then came law school. I studied obsessively for the SATs, scored in the 98th percentile, and was accepted into Harvard Lab. When I called my mother to tell her, her response was predictable. "Harvard? And how do you plan to pay for that? Always trying to live beyond your means, Amélie." I didn't tell her about the scholarship, or the loans, or the extra jobs I'd be taking on. I simply replied, "I'll figure it out," and hung up. At Harvard, I met Thomas Hansons in my constitutional law class. He was a tall, attentive man with kind eyes that reminded me of my father. While the others competed to stand out, he asked genuine questions, he truly listened. One night, while we were studying together in the library, he said to me, "You never talk about your family." By then we'd already been dating for 3 months. "There's not much to tell," I replied, my eyes fixed on the book. "Everyone has a story," she murmured. That night I opened my heart to him. I told him about my mother, her impossible standards and constant criticism, how my whole life had revolved around trying, and failing, to be what she expected. Thomas didn't interrupt. When I finished, he simply took my hand. "She's wrong about you," he said calmly. "Someday she'll understand." I married Thomas Hansons in our final year of law school. My mother, Claire Moreau, attended the low-key ceremony at the courthouse. She could barely conceal her disapproval. Her lips were pressed into a tight line as I adjusted the simple dress I was wearing. "Are you sure about this?" she whispered, in that tone that always turned any question into a judgment. I didn't answer. I had already given up trying to convince her of anything. After we graduated, Thomas landed a job at a corporate law firm in Boston, while I began my career in family law. I worked endless hours, determined to excel. When the opportunity arose to clerk for a judge, I took it without hesitation. That experience opened the door to the prosecutor's office, where I specialized in cases involving minors. My mother, however, never showed the slightest pride. "Another new job, you can't seem to hold on to anything," she remarked during one of our increasingly sporadic phone calls. I decided to keep quiet about my progress. She preferred to think I was just wandering aimlessly. I knew that wasn't the case. I was climbing. 2 years later, Lena, our daughter, was born. With her kind eyes, inherited from Thomas, and my stubborn chin, she became the center of my life. I discovered what it meant to love unconditionally and promised myself that I would never allow my daughter to doubt her worth, as I had had to. Balancing motherhood and my career wasn't easy. There were nights when I cradled Lena in one arm while holding files in the other, and mornings when I arrived at court after barely 3 hours of sleep, hiding the milk stains on my blazer under my robe. But I managed. Thomas and I were a true team, sharing responsibilities and encouraging each other's dreams. I remember perfectly the day of the most important call of my life. I was changing Lena when I was notified that I had been selected as a judge. I was only 24 years old, one of the youngest to receive that appointment in the district. The committee had been impressed by my work in the prosecutor's office, and in particular, by the way I handled sensitive cases involving children in crisis. I accepted without hesitation. That night, we celebrated in our small apartment with a bottle of champagne, while our daughter babbled happily on the sofa. "Are you going to tell your mother?" Thomas asked gently. For a moment I imagined his pride, the possibility that she would admit she'd been wrong about me. But reality intervened. No. I would find a way to downplay it. That's how my mother continued to believe I was unstable, incapable of staying the course. While every morning I wore the black robe and made decisions that changed the lives of entire families. Irony was never indifferent to me. For 6 years I served as a judge without my mother knowing. Our relationship was distant, with obligatory visits at parties and occasional phone calls that left me exhausted. She adored Lena, but she couldn't help criticizing me. "That pacifier is going to ruin her teeth. Is that what you feed her? That way she'll never stop crying. You work too much, the children need their mother present." I learned to let her comments slide off me, shielding myself and my daughter from her poison. What I didn't know was that my mother was saving each of those criticisms like weapons for a battle that had yet to begin. One Tuesday afternoon I received another unexpected call. I was in my office reviewing a difficult custody case when I saw my sister's name, Natalie, on the screen. Our relationship had never been close. 2 years younger than me, she had always been Mom's favorite, obedient, compliant, until she dropped out of college in her junior year and fell into the world of addiction. For a decade, she was trapped in that abyss. Mellie's voice sounded broken. "I need help." She was in rehab again, her third attempt. This time, Child Protective Services had intervened. Her children, Elodie and Maxime, aged 6 and 4, had been found alone in their apartment while she was unconscious in the bathroom from an overdose. She had survived, but she was about to lose custody. "They say I won't be able to get them back until I finish the program and prove I can stay clean," she sobbed. "They're talking about putting them in foster care. Please, don't let them put my babies in a home with strangers." I closed my eyes. I knew the weight of what he was asking of me. Tomas and I had spoken before, during other crises, about taking in his children, but it had never gone beyond a hypothesis. This time it was real. "Let me talk to Tomas. We'll sort this out." He didn't hesitate. "Of course, we'll bring them here. They're family." That night, when Lena was asleep, we talked about it in the kitchen. The next day, I started the process for temporary custody of my nephews. The social worker sounded relieved that someone from the family would be taking care of them. The children had been in emergency foster care for 3 days, scared and confused. But before hanging up, the woman gave me a piece of information that chilled me to the bone. Their mother has also applied for custody. I remained silent, feeling a punch in my gut. My mother, the same one who questioned my every decision as a mother, now wanted to raise 2 little ones who had suffered more than she could ever comprehend. "Are you sure?" I asked awkwardly. "Yes. Claire Moreau filed the application yesterday. She says that, as the maternal grandmother, the children will be better off with her." I understood immediately. It wasn't about Elodie and Maxime, or their well-being. It was another way to exert control, another way to demonstrate that she, and not I, knew what was best for the children. It was the ultimate proof that my mother didn't trust me as a mother. As soon as I found out, I tried calling her, but she didn't answer. Instead, she sent me a short, sharp text message: "We'll let the courts decide what's best for the children." The courts, my own turf, and yet I knew I couldn't preside over a case involving my own family. She knew it perfectly well. What she didn't know was that I would be there myself, not as a judge, but as a custody petitioner, thus revealing my profession. The first mediation session was scheduled for the following week. I requested a personal leave of absence from my judicial duties, citing a family emergency. Margot Varigan, the senior magistrate, was understanding. She was a mother herself and had been a close mentor to me since my appointment. "Take all the time you need. Family comes first," she told me. When I arrived at the mediation room, my mother was already seated. Her rigid posture and face displayed the same disapproving expression that had been with me all my life. She wore an impeccable navy blue suit, and her hair, freshly dyed and styled, projected the image of a competent and reliable grandmother. "Hello, Mother," I greeted, sitting down across from her. "Amelie," she replied with a slight nod. "I suppose you understand why I had to do this." "Actually, I don't. Tomas and I are perfectly capable of taking care of Elodie and Maxime." She snorted disdainfully. "You've always put your career above everything else. Those children need stability, attention, and proper guidance. They need someone to be present." Before I could respond to that insult, the mediator, a kind-looking woman named Patricia, entered the room and asked us to explain our reasons. I spoke about our home, about the spare room we had prepared so the 2 children could settle in comfortably. I mentioned Lena, excited to meet her cousins, and explained that both Tomas and I had flexible work schedules that allowed us to care for them without neglecting our professional responsibilities. Then my mother spoke, and I felt the ground crumble beneath my feet. "My daughter," she said with a voice heavy with feigned concern, "has never been able to maintain stability in her life. She constantly changes jobs, chases fleeting opportunities, and leaves her own daughter with a nanny most of the time. These children need constant care, and I can provide it. I'm retired, I have a comfortable home, savings, and I can dedicate myself to them completely." The mediator looked at me. "Would you like to respond to your mother's description of your work history?" I opened my mouth, but remained silent. Part of me wanted to shout the truth: "I'm a judge, I've been in the same position for 6 years." But another part, the wounded girl still seeking approval, couldn't utter it. I simply said, "My job is stable. I can provide documentation to prove it." My mother's smile was thin, almost victorious. "We'll see." The session ended without an agreement. As I was leaving, she stopped me in the hallway, grabbing my arm. "I'm doing this for the children's sake," he said, his tone feigning nobility. "Must you admit they'd be better off with me?" "No, Mother. What I see is that you've never believed in me, and this is just another way of proving it." Her eyes narrowed. "If you truly cared about those children, you would step aside. And if you truly cared about me, would you have ever supported me?" I replied as I pulled my arm away and walked back, my hands trembling. It wasn't just about Elodie and Maxime anymore, though they remained my priority. It was also the accumulation of 3 decades of criticism and self-doubt, the weight of proving to that woman who never considered me good enough that I could stand up to her. I couldn't imagine how far I would go to win. During a preparation session, my lawyer, Sophie Vandenberg, warned me in earnest. "Your mother is gathering evidence against you." We were in her office, a space illuminated by windows overlooking the city of Brussels, a stark contrast to the darkness of that conversation. "What kind of tests?" I asked, though deep down I already suspected. Sophie slid a folder across the desk. She submitted a detailed report of what she calls your parental deficiencies. It included dates, alleged incidents, comments, and asserted that I had neglected Lena and would do the same to Elodie and Maxime. I opened the folder with trembling hands. Page after page contained meticulously recorded criticisms, from Lena's birth to the last family gathering 3 months prior. Every perceived mistake, every decision she disagreed with, was noted with date and context. One of the entries chilled me to the bone. June 10th of this year. Amelie admits that she sometimes takes work calls during Lena's dinner. She prioritizes her career over her daughter's basic needs. This pattern of behavior demonstrates that she is not suited to take on more caregiving responsibilities. "She's been planning this all along," I whispered. "All those visits, all those times she offered to look after Lena, she was just building a case against me." "And not only that," Sophie added gravely. "She's got witnesses. Your Aunt Chantal, your cousin Bridget, and even the neighbor, Madame Leroy, are all willing to testify about your supposed shortcomings as a mother." I felt like I couldn't breathe. I barely saw my aunt once a year at Christmas, and she moved away when Lena was just a baby. However, my mother had always known how to persuade people. My phone vibrated with a message from Thomas, who was at home with Lena, the social worker who had just left after the home assessment. "I think it went well. I love you." At least that was one point in our favor. Our house was safe, clean, and welcoming. We had prepared Elodie and Maxime's room with twin beds, colorful quilts, and age-appropriate toys. The social worker had noticed Lena's happiness and good health. "And what about my job?" I asked Sophie. "She keeps saying I've been jumping from one job to another. When it comes out that you've been a judge for 6 years, that will be our strongest defense," my lawyer assured me. "That fact will destroy your mother's credibility." "But tell me, Amelie, why didn't you ever tell him?" I looked out the window at the city. At first, because I knew he would downplay it, minimize it. Over time, it became, I don't know, a boundary I set for myself. I had always felt that my mother, Claire Moreau, found fault with everything I did. If I made a breakthrough in my career, she pointed out the lack of time I spent with my family. If I dedicated myself to raising my daughter Lena, she reproached me for neglecting my professional life. Her approval seemed an impossible goal, a horizon that receded further and further no matter how hard I ran toward it. Even so, there was a part of my life she couldn't criticize, simply because she didn't know it. That hidden aspect of my reality was about to be exposed in the most public and painful way possible. I remember the way Sophie Vandenberg, my lawyer, looked at me with a mixture of seriousness and empathy when she warned me. "Amelie, your mother will find out at the hearing. It's inevitable." The trial was scheduled for the following week, and Judge Margot Verigian would preside. This was no coincidence. The court clerk had recognized my name when Claire accused me of being unstable as both a mother and a professional. That official brought the case directly to the magistrate's attention, who expressly requested to take it on. She didn't do it to favor me, I knew that well, but because she understood the magnitude of what was at stake. That night, after putting Lena to bed, I sat with Thomas Hanson's on the porch of our house. The crisp June air brushed against my face, but the chill I felt came from elsewhere, from the weight of the list of accusations I held in my hands. It was the cruel inventory my mother had compiled of my supposed failures as a mother. I spread it before him, and as he read, I saw indignation tighten across his face. "This is insane," she said gravely. "She's taken perfectly normal situations and twisted them into negligence. Being late to a family dinner doesn't make you a bad mother. Taking a work call while eating dinner? No way. If we applied those standards, no parent in the world would be considered good enough." I slumped against his shoulder, exhausted, tears threatening to spill. "Has it always been like this, Thomas? I never reached the level she demands, but I never imagined she would go so far as to try to destroy me in court." He stood by me with firmness and determination. "He won't succeed. We're going to fight and we'll get through this. The truth is on your side, Amelie, even if she tries to smear it." Her words comforted me, but at the same time, the reality of the impending legal process chilled me to the bone. News of the dispute had spread like wildfire through the legal community. Although I had taken a leave of absence from my position as a judge, I remained part of that world. In the courthouse hallways, my colleagues looked at me with a mixture of curiosity, surprise, and pity. What had always been my professional refuge was transforming into a hostile environment, where my private life would be dissected before everyone. 2 days before the hearing, Thomas found me in the room we had prepared for my niece and nephew, Elodie and Maxime. I was sitting on the floor, surrounded by children's books, my cheeks wet and my eyes swollen from crying. He knelt beside me and took my hand. "Talk to me, Amelie. What if he's right?" I whispered, barely audible. "What if I'm not good enough? What if I can't give them what they need?" Thomas cupped my face in his hands and forced me to look up. "Don't let that voice take over. You're a wonderful mother to Lena, and you'll be an exceptional tutor for Elodie and Maxime, too. Claire's voice isn't the truth. It never has been, it's just her way of controlling things." I wanted to believe her, even though doubts gnawed at me from within. The first supervised visit with the children was the following day, arranged by Child Protection Services. Elodie, barely 6 years old, already displayed a painful maturity. Her serious gaze reflected the need to care for her little brother, to protect him from everything. Maxime, 4 years old, hid behind her, shy, though his curious eyes betrayed him. I crouched down to be at his level. "Hello, I'm your Aunt Amelie. He is her Uncle Thomas and she is her cousin Lena." Lena, excited, stepped forward with a book in her hands. "Do you like stories?" she asked with a nervous smile. Elodie hesitated, but finally nodded cautiously. "Me too," Lena replied, and sat down on the floor, patting the empty space beside her. Gradually, the two little ones moved closer, and when Lena began to recite the story she knew by heart, I saw them relax, even if only a little. That was a tiny but crucial miracle. Thomas squeezed my hand, and in that instant I knew, we were right. They were meant to be with us, to grow up alongside Lena, surrounded by stability and love. I would give everything I had to achieve it. The night before the hearing, insomnia overcame me. The courtroom scene replayed in my mind like an endless echo, my mother hurling accusations, my colleagues listening, the truth about my career exposed in public. Dawn came far too soon. It was a clear, sunny June day, the kind of day that makes you think of leisurely strolls, but for me it was nothing more than a cruel contradiction in the face of the approaching storm. I stopped on the steps of the courthouse, the same place I had entered so many times through the judge's entrance. That day, however, I had to walk through the front door like any other citizen. Tomas accompanied me, firm, his hand on my back conveying strength. "Ready?" he asked me. I nodded, though the word "ready" was far from describing what I felt. We had carefully chosen our outfits. I wore a simple navy blue dress with a light cardigan. I wanted to project seriousness, but also approachability. Tomas wore a gray suit with the tie Lena had given him for his birthday, his lucky charm. The courthouse was buzzing with activity. The murmurs died away as soon as we crossed the corridors. Some colleagues greeted me with neutral gestures, but I knew everyone was watching. My mother was already in the room, impeccably dressed, accompanied by Richard de Smet, her notoriously tough and ruthless lawyer. Claire wore a gray suit with a pearl necklace, her hair perfectly styled, as if she were on a runway of respectability. She didn't say a word to me. Her silence was another weapon in her arsenal. In the front row sat the social worker, holding a voluminous report summarizing visits to both homes. Her opinion would carry significant weight in the judge's decision. At 9 o'clock sharp, the bailiff announced their entry. Margot Berhagen appeared with the solemnity that had always characterized her. Her black robe and the silver highlights in her hair commanded immediate respect. She sat down and opened the session in a firm voice. "We are here to discuss the custody of the minor children, Elodie and Maxime Collins." Her gaze swept around the room. "I understand that their maternal aunt, Amélie Dupont, and maternal grandmother, Claire Moreau, are seeking guardianship." The proceedings began with formal presentations. Sophie Vandenberg spoke first on my behalf, emphasizing the stability of our home, our financial security, and above all, the importance of keeping the siblings together so they could grow up in a loving and stable environment with their cousin. I had been very clear with Sophie Vandenberg before the hearing. We would discuss my job security, but without revealing that she was a judge. We preferred that this revelation come at the appropriate moment. Everything was calculated. Then Richard de Smet, my mother Claire Moreau's lawyer, stood up. With cold certainty, he began his statement. She painted a portrait of my mother as the selfless grandmother willing to sacrifice her retirement years for the well-being of her grandchildren. And she portrayed me as the niece supposedly obsessed with work, incapable of prioritizing family. She closed with a sentence that pierced me. "Your Honor, we will demonstrate that Miss Dupont's background and work history render her fundamentally unsuitable to be the guardian of these vulnerable children." I felt Thomas Hansen's tension beside me. I silently squeezed his hands, pleading with him to remain calm. We knew that attack was coming. We had anticipated it. The first witnesses were character references for both sides. Thomas's parents testified about our skills as caregivers and the stability of our home. Then my colleague on the bench, Judge David de Klerk, spoke about my integrity and character, carefully avoiding revealing my true position. Next, it was my mother's witness's turn. My Aunt Chantal took the stand, visibly uncomfortable. She avoided looking at me while claiming she had doubts about my abilities as a mother, based on some family gatherings where, according to her, I seemed distracted by Lena. During cross-examination, Sophie pointed out that Chantal had only seen me with Lena 4 times in 8 years, insufficient to form a serious opinion about my parenting. Later, my cousin Bridget joined the discussion from California via video call. She repeated almost verbatim phrases I recognized as taken from my mother's notes about my supposed failings. When Sophie asked her when she had last seen me in person, she admitted it had been 5 years, at a family gathering when Lena was just 3. Mid-morning, it was Claire Moreau's turn. She settled herself on the stand with arrogant confidence, convinced of her own righteousness. Richard Smith guided her through pre-prepared questions about her relationship with Elodie and Maxime, about her home, her financial stability, and her willingness to take care of them. Then came the part she dreaded most. "Madame Moreau," Richard asked, "do you have any doubts about your daughter's ability to provide a stable home for these children?" My mother sighed dramatically, feigning regret, and I gritted my teeth. "I don't want to speak ill of my daughter," she said, just before I did. "But Amélie has always had trouble committing and keeping things in order. As a mother, I've seen her jump from one interest to another, from one job to another, never settling down. Even with Lena, she seems more focused on her career than on her daughter's needs." Richard didn't let the opportunity pass him by. "Could you give us details of her work history?" My mother leaned forward, her voice laced with mock concern. "Amélie has never held a job for more than a year or 2. After graduating from law school, she worked at a firm, then became a judge's clerk, later tried her hand as an assistant district attorney, and then changed jobs again. He always says it's a step up, but he's never satisfied. He can barely hold down a job." A murmur rippled through the room. I remained motionless, finally calm. because the accusation had already been made public. Tomas squeezed my hand tightly. And do you think that job insecurity affects your ability to be a mother? Richard insisted. Of course. Children need consistency. Amelie's inconsistency creates an unpredictable environment. Elodie and Maxime have already experienced enough instability with my other daughter's problems. They need a solid foundation, not someone whose priorities are always elsewhere. I felt a tear run down my cheek, which I quickly wiped away. These weren't mere attacks, they were a true reflection of how my mother had always seen me, as if I were incapable, unreliable, inadequate. When Richard finished, Sophie Vandenberg stood up. She walked confidently toward the podium. Madame Moreau, when was the last time her daughter mentioned a job change? My mother frowned. She doesn't always tell me directly, but I know she's changed jobs many times in the legal field. So, I don't know her current situation or her specific position. I know she works as some kind of lawyer, she replied dismissively. The details change so often that it's hard to keep track of her. Sophie nodded calmly. Your Honor, I would like to present evidence regarding Miss Dupont's employment history. Magistrate Margot Barahegan authorized it. Sophie handed a document to the clerk, who distributed it among the court, my mother, and her lawyer. This is a verified record of Amélie Dupont's employment history since she graduated from law school 8 years ago, she explained. My mother took it without flinching. Sophie asked her to read the last entry. Claire squinted to decipher the text. It says, Family Court Judge, 6th District, Massachusetts. Duration, 6 years to the present. Her gaze rose in confusion. The room fell into absolute silence. All eyes were on us. Judge Barahegan cleared her throat and her voice rang out solemnly. For the record, I confirm that Amélie Dupont has served as a judge in this same court for the past 6 years. She was one of the youngest judges appointed in the district and has an exemplary record, especially in child protection cases. My mother's face paled. Her hands trembled as she held the document. She's been a judge for 6 years, the magistrate repeated, and the words hung in the air like a verdict. Richard tried to whisper something to my mother, but she shook her head, still staring at me, in utter disbelief. Sophie continued in a firm voice. Madame Moreau, with this information, do you wish to modify your statement regarding your daughter's alleged job instability? My mother swallowed hard. I didn't know. Sophie didn't budge. And you didn't know because, after years of criticism and contempt, your daughter stopped sharing her professional achievements with you? Is that correct? Before my mother could answer, Richard interrupted. Objection, Your Honor. The lawyer is testifying. Accepted, said Judge Barahegan. Miss Vandenberg, rephrased the question. Sophie nodded. Madame Moreau, when was the last time you expressed pride or approval for any of your daughter's professional achievements? The silence stretched on. My mother looked down at her hands. I don't remember. No further questions, Your Honor, Sophie concluded, returning to my side. As I stepped down from the stand, I saw Claire as I'd never seen her before, shrunken, dejected. For the first time in my life, my mother seemed small to me. The next witness to testify was the social worker, Miss Patel. She explained that both houses were physically suitable for the children, but that her recommendation favored placing them with us, partly because they would have a close cousin of similar age and partly because we had proven to be a strong family unit. Finally, it was my turn to testify. As I raised my hand to swear to tell the truth, an unexpected calm washed over me. The truth was out in the open, whatever happened next. At least I wouldn't have to carry that secret that had consumed me for years. Sophie Vandenberg, my lawyer, carefully guided me through each question, talking about our home, about the plans Thomas Hansen and I had to integrate Elodie and Maxime into our family, and also about my relationship with my sister Natalie. Then, without mincing words, she addressed the inevitable. Amélie, could you explain to the court why you never told your mother about your position as a judge? I took a breath and fixed my gaze on Claire Moreau, who until that moment had avoided looking at me. Ever since I was a child, I was never enough for her. My achievements always ended up being seen as flaws in her eyes, and every goal I reached was minimized as a naive dream. When I was appointed judge 6 years ago, I decided not to share it with her. I longed to keep at least one aspect of my life free from her criticism and wanted to do my job without her telling me, yet again, where I was failing. Silence filled the room as she continued. I am not an unstable person. I am not an incapable mother. I've built a career I'm proud of, a family I love, and a home where Lena is growing up happy. And that's exactly what Anelity and Maxime deserve, an environment where they can trust themselves, not one where their worth is always in doubt. When Sophie finished, Richard de Smet, my mother's lawyer, declined to ask me any questions. There was nothing to refute. At that moment, the presiding judge, Margot Birajan, called for a recess before delivering her verdict. As I left, I saw Claire Moreau sitting alone on a bench in the corridor. For a moment I thought about approaching him, but Thomas gently touched my arm, and together we went outside for some fresh air. When we returned, the room was more crowded. The rumor about my revelation had already spread among those present. I sat up straight, avoiding curious glances. Thomas settled in beside me, making me feel safe. My mother came in last, accompanied by her lawyer. I saw her looking different, diminished, her confidence shattered, her expression rigid. When our eyes met, she immediately looked away, a tacit acknowledgement that the power dynamic between us was no longer the same. Judge Birajan resumed her place on the bench. Her expression was impenetrable as she arranged the papers in front of her. The entire courtroom held its breath. After carefully considering all the testimonies and evidence, she began solemnly, I have reached a decision in the custody case of Elodie and Maxime. He listed the factors he had considered, the stability of both households, the children's bond with each parent, the available support networks, and, above all, the social worker's recommendations. I felt Thomas's hand tighten around mine. I recognize Mrs. Moreau's genuine desire to care for her grandchildren, he continued, but I believe the most beneficial environment for them at this time is with Amélie Dupont and Thomas Hansens. The presence of a cousin close in age, her demonstrated parenting skills, and the social worker's strong recommendation all supported this decision. Such immense relief washed over me that I could barely hear the rest of her words. We had won. Elodie and Maxime would come home with us. The judge continued. I also order a regular visitation schedule with Mrs. Moreau, in order to preserve her relationship with her grandchildren. The details will be arranged with the assistance of family services. This court will retain jurisdiction to modify the agreements as circumstances evolve, including considering possible reunification with the biological mother if she successfully completes her rehabilitation program. The session is adjourned. The sound of the gavel striking echoed through the room, and with it, the tension that had kept me rigid vanished at once. Tomas put his arms around me, and I buried my face in his shoulder, overwhelmed with emotion. Sophia approached with a warm smile. Congratulations, Amélie. This is the right ending for those children. I nodded, unable to speak because of the lump in my throat. As we gathered our things, I noticed my mother was still standing alone, her lawyer talking to the court clerk in the distance. I impulsively approached her. Mom, I said softly. She looked up. Her expression was a mosaic of emotions, pain, anger, and perhaps, for the first time, shame. 6 years, she whispered. You've been a judge for 6 years and I didn't even know it. You never asked, I replied calmly. You always assumed I was failing. She shuddered at my words. I only wanted to protect you from disappointment. The world is cruel, Amélie. You needed to be prepared, and that's why I made sure you never felt like you were enough. That wasn't protection, I replied. It was control. Her lips tightened into a thin line. You're stubborn, always convinced you know more than me. And in the end I was right, I replied gently. I built a life you know nothing about because you never took the time to really see me. You created a version of me that never existed. She looked away, picked up her purse, and stood up abruptly. The judge said I'll have visitation rights. Yes, I admitted, and will honor that. But there will be limits. I won't allow Elodie and Maxime to grow up feeling like I do, she said, constantly criticized and belittled. She opened her mouth as if to reply, but stopped. For the first time, she seemed unable to find the words. "We can talk about the details next week," I added. "Right now I need to focus on getting the kids home." As I was about to leave, her voice reached me. "Amelie," he hesitated for a second, then concluded. "Congratulations on becoming a judge. It's a great achievement." The words that came out of her mouth were stiff, harsh, almost as if she were speaking a foreign language she barely mastered. They didn't sound natural coming from her, but even so, they represented the closest thing to a gesture of approval I'd received in decades. That simple acknowledgement, so rare and clumsy, struck me like an unexpected shock. I, who had spent most of my life searching for even the slightest sign of validation from her, could barely react. I simply bowed my head in a sober gesture, without uttering a word, and then turned to rejoin Thomas Hansens and Sophie Vandenberg, who were waiting expectantly by the door of the room. The air outside greeted me like a revelation. The afternoon shone with an almost solemn clarity. The sun's rays fell upon the courthouse steps as if symbolically marking a before and after in my life. I felt that, in that instant, something was closing and something new was opening. Thomas, with his usual practicality, took out his cell phone and immediately contacted the social worker to coordinate Elodie and Maxime's move. His firm and responsible tone contrasted sharply with the emotional turmoil that still raged inside me. The next morning, I returned to the same place, but with a different feeling. I slowly climbed the courthouse steps, taking deep breaths, as if I wanted to etch into my lungs the certainty that this chapter was behind me. The air smelled fresh, mingled with the noise of cars and the hurried conversations of passers-by. I, on the other hand, stood motionless, enveloped in a strange equilibrium between a sense of victory and a lingering melancholy that refused to leave. Thomas, who knew me better than anyone, affectionately put his arm around my waist. "Are you okay?" he asked, looking at me with genuine concern. I sighed, trying to sort out my feelings. "Yes, I am. I just never imagined we'd have to come to this, resolving our family conflicts in front of a judge, with our private lives exposed so publicly." He gently stroked my arm, trying to reassure me. "I know, Amelie. But perhaps it was necessary. Your mother has spent years taking refuge in a fictional version of reality, constructed to suit her needs. Sooner or later, she had to face the facts." That day we spent preparing the house for the children's arrival. On the way, we stopped at a stationery store where Lena insisted on personally choosing the materials for a welcome sign. With her small hands, she picked out colors and adhesive letters, while asking me to help her make sure everything was perfect. That simple scene deeply moved me. As I patiently guided her, making sure she didn't make a mistake, I felt an unbreakable commitment within me. I promised that Elodie and Maxime would never grow up with the idea that they had to try too hard to be accepted, or that they had to change to be enough. In my house, in our home, they would be valued exactly as they were. The afternoon passed with a mixture of nervousness and restrained joy. Preparing the rooms, arranging the toys, checking the smallest details, every action was imbued with a symbolism that filled me with hope. The family was changing, and I was determined that this time it would be built on solid foundations, not on the cracks of the past. Late that night, as we finished dinner in a peaceful, domestic atmosphere, the doorbell rang suddenly. Thomas got up immediately to answer it, and I continued helping Lena with her dessert. A moment later, he returned accompanied by an unexpected figure who stopped my breath. There was my mother, Claire Moreau. She entered the dining room with hesitant steps, as if every step she took weighed heavily on her soul. She looked around uncomfortably, detached, as if she didn't know how to fit into that space which, paradoxically, belonged to her own flesh and blood. Her presence filled the air with tension. Lena, in her radiant innocence, broke the spell with a broad smile and a spontaneous gesture. "Hello, Grandma," she exclaimed, waving her hand. "Hi, Lena," Claire replied, her tone surprisingly soft, quite different from her usual one. Then she looked me straight in the eye and added cautiously, "Can we talk in private?" Thomas understood immediately and offered me a way out. "Don't worry, darling. I'll get Lena ready for her bath. Take your time." I led her to the living room, pointing to the sofa while I sat down in the armchair opposite. We remained silent for a few seconds that seemed like an eternity. Finally, she spoke, in a low voice. "Your house is really cozy." Her eyes lingered on the toys arranged in colorful boxes, the family portraits displayed on the shelves, the warmth emanating from every corner. "It's clear there's life here, there's love." "Thank you," I replied, in a neutral tone, waiting for her to reveal the reason for her visit. I noticed her hands fidgeting over the fabric of her skirt, a nervous gesture almost unheard of in her. Finally, she decided to continue. "I've been thinking about what happened today, about what you said in front of Judge Margot Birajan. Perhaps I've been too demanding of you over the years. I thought that by pushing you hard, I was preparing you for a harsh world. I thought that this way you would avoid disappointment if things didn't go as planned. I felt a lump in my throat. But things did work out, Mom. I achieved exactly what I dreamed of. I became what I always wanted to be, and you ignored it because you were convinced I would fail." I saw her face twitch slightly, as if my words hurt her. "I know," she admitted, lowering her voice a little. "Now I see it." He paused, searching for the words with difficulty. "Amelie, I don't know how to be someone other than the person I've been, but I want to try. For Elodie, for Maxime, for Lena, and perhaps for us too." It wasn't a complete apology. However, coming from Claire, that acknowledgement was almost a miracle. It was a small glimmer of change, a thread of hope in a relationship worn down over years. "This will take time," I said cautiously, choosing each word carefully. "Trust doesn't spring from nothing, it's rebuilt little by little, especially after so many hurts." She lowered her head, her eyes moist. "I understand. I'm just asking for one more chance. We could start with a visiting schedule for Elodie and Maxime," I suggested. "Perhaps you could come for dinner on Sundays. That way they can get to know you in a safe environment." "I would love to," she replied, and in her eyes I perceived, for the first time, a glimmer of respect. Something I had sought all my life without success. When she stood up to leave, she paused before the mantelpiece. There lay a photograph of me, in my judicial robes, accompanied by photos and a linen cloth, taken on the day of my investiture. Her lips trembled just before she uttered words that pierced my soul. "You look very distinguished. Jan would be proud of you." I didn't have time to react. He left, leaving behind a thick silence. I stood in the doorway, watching her walk away to her car. That complex woman had shaped much of who I was, for better and for worse. Minutes later, Thomas Hansens found me there, still staring at the empty street. "What did you come looking for?" he asked gently. "A second chance, at least I think so," I replied without looking away. Thomas wrapped his arms around my waist, resting his chin on my shoulder. "Will you give it to her?" I thought calmly about his question. "Not unconditionally, but yes, for the children, and perhaps for her too. She's not young anymore, Thomas. I don't want to reach a day when I look back and regret not having tried." He nodded gently against my shoulder. "He has always been the strongest person I know, Amélie Dupont, and the most compassionate." That night, before going to sleep, I paused to watch Lena. She was fast asleep under the soft light of her bedside lamp. I found myself thinking about the legacy we pass on to our children, not just physical traits or customs, but also fears, wounds, and beliefs about ourselves and the world. For 30 years I had carried the burden of never being enough, because that's what my mother, Claire Moreau, had made me believe. But I wasn't going to pass that burden on to Lena, or Elodie, or Maxime. I knew that the next day would bring new challenges, integrating 2 traumatized children into our home, setting clear boundaries with my mother, resuming my duties at the courthouse, and simultaneously bearing the weight of my expanded family responsibilities. But that night, in the quiet of my daughter's room, I felt ready for whatever came. For the first time in my life, I had absolute certainty that I was enough. 3 months after the courtroom revelation, I found myself in my office adjusting my robes before entering the courtroom. The weight of the black cloth on my shoulders was a tangible reminder of the authority I had gained and the enormous responsibility I was assuming. 3 framed photographs rested on my desk, one of Thomas and me on our wedding day, another of Lena on her 5th birthday, and, a recent addition, one of Elodie and Maxime laughing heartily as they played under the garden sprinkler with Lena. My return to the bench after the custody hearing had been met with respect. No one spoke openly about the case, but many colleagues had sent me notes of support, and in the courthouse hallways, there was no shortage of gestures of solidarity. Judge Margot Barahegan came to my office on my first day back. "Family always comes first," Amelie told me firmly. "But we're glad to have you back here. The children who come to this court need judges who understand what's really at stake." I thanked her for her words and, silently, also for her role in uncovering the truth. With a simple gesture, she dismissed my gratitude. "The truth always finds a way to come out," was her reply. At home, little by little, we had built a new routine. There were no longer 3 of us, but 5. Elodie and Maxime had arrived with small suitcases and wary looks, unsure of their new surroundings. Lena, however, quickly became their personal guide, showing them the tree swing in the garden, the hiding place under the stairs where we kept the board games, and the kitchen drawer dedicated to art supplies. "You can use all of this," she told them solemnly, "except the glitter. That's only for special projects because Dad says it multiplies when you're not looking at it." The first few weeks were tough. Maxime would wake up in the middle of the night screaming, trembling with fear until one of us managed to calm him down. Elodie, always protective, watched his every move, every interaction, as if she didn't quite trust that we would take good care of him. With Tomas, we established firm routines, meal times, playtime, and rest periods. Consistency was our key to providing them with security. Over time, Maxime's awakenings became less frequent, and Elodie began to relax, play more, and be watched less. Little by little, they stopped feeling like guests and became part of our family. From the rehabilitation center, Natalie continued her weekly calls. Her voice sounded increasingly resolute, and although her words were tinged with regret, they also conveyed a fragile hope. "I'm fighting to get better," she would repeat to Elodie and Maxime. "Someday I'll take care of them myself again. In the meantime, I trust their Aunt Amelie and Uncle Tomas." Listening to her stirred something deep inside me. I had visited the center twice, witnessing firsthand the unwavering dedication of her efforts. This time she seemed different, more serene, less anxious to project an immediate change. She seemed to understand that recovery wasn't a one-day goal, but a long process, full of relapses and small victories. Meanwhile, at home, each of us was learning to adapt to this new equilibrium. Elodie began sharing girlish confidences with Lena before bed, and Maxime laughed louder and louder when Tomas carried him on his shoulders for walks around the garden. For my part, I found myself smiling with a peace I never imagined. I understood that my role was no longer just that of a judge in a courtroom, nor that of a daughter burdened by Claire Moreau's demands. Now I was the guardian of a renewed home, caught between the past and the future of those children who trusted me. Perhaps tomorrow would bring complications, legal disputes, or unresolved family tensions. But when I looked around, I saw something I had never felt before, a space full of life, laughter, and second chances. There were no absolute certainties, except one: the future wouldn't be perfect, but I was ready to face it with the strength that had always been denied me and with the confidence that, at last, I had learned to give myself.